I'm Helen Profiter, Director of Economic Development for Frederick County. Thanks for joining us this morning. I have the joy of actually not speaking that much today. So I'm just going to, I know, yay for me. I'm going to introduce the county executive and then why you are here. I'm going to introduce the economists that we hired to kind of set us on a path to move Frederick County forward. So very first up is County Executive Gardner. County Executive Jan Gardner created the first of its kind private-public innovation center called ROOT. This center was built to make business easier in Frederick County. In addition to that, she partnered with Frederick Community College to create a synergistic workforce development center, which is one of its kind in the state of Maryland. And while you all are all here today, she also funded the first Growth Opportunity Economic Development Plan for Frederick County. These are just a few examples of her leading us in an innovative, cutting-edge concept to move Frederick forward. I say this often, and I'm not joking when I say this. County Executive Gardner is one of the best economic developers we have in Frederick County. She truly does value our businesses, understand what will move us forward, and put into place the things we need to best position Frederick for the future. Let's welcome County Executive Jan Gardner.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for that nice introduction, Helen. I was just really ready to come up here and get started. So I want to acknowledge two council members who have joined us here today. We have Councilwoman Jessica Fitzwater and Councilman Jerry Donald. So we appreciate their support for this effort and for really everything we do. So now today is really an exciting day in Frederick County because today we're going to hear about the possibilities for the county's future economy. Frederick County is a great place to do business, and of course all of you know that because you do business here now. But we want to make sure that Frederick County remains a great place to do business into the future. So to accomplish that, we need to seize our opportunities and position ourselves well for the future, because the only thing we know for sure is that change is happening, and we're going to continue to see the global economy and regional economies influence us. Communities that lead the way with economic growth and with job growth all share one common trait. They develop a vision for the future and a plan to get there. And that's what we're doing here today in Frederick County. Over the past 2 years, we've had several initiatives that have centered on creating that long-term vision for business growth in Frederick County, and Helen mentioned one of them, which was the establishment of ROOT. If you haven't been over to ROOT at 118 North Market Street, drop in and check it out. It's really a cool place and an innovative business development center. And the next step really was for us to gather the data and develop a GO, or growth opportunity strategy. So Frederick County's Office of Economic Development contracted with the University of Baltimore's Jacob France Institute to identify our community's economic strengths so we can focus our efforts and make the most of our opportunities. Now, we think we already know what our assets are and what our strengths are, but it's really important for us to have that independent and in-depth analysis, that research that will help us to plan for the future. So the Jacob France Institute is a leading source of information to help shape business policy and government policy. And they help provide this information at the federal, state, and local levels. The economists you'll hear from in a few moments, Richard Clinch and Mitch Horowitz, are well-respected, top-notch economists. They personally conducted much of the research that went into the GO strategy. They compiled qualitative and quantitative data, crunched the numbers, held focus groups, and analyzed the results. So for those of you here who took part in one of the focus groups, I say thank you. Your input has been invaluable. This morning, we'll hear the findings and the recommendations. And the GO strategy will ultimately become the foundation for our economic development plans for the future. It will help us to target our efforts to attract, expand, and cultivate specific industry clusters. Earlier this year, when we met with the New York bond rating agencies, they were particularly interested in this GO strategy. They always like to see people doing planning and then executing those plans. In fact, the fact that we do exercises like this really help the county to maintain its AAA bond rating from all three agencies. So to keep our momentum going, we must seize our opportunities. So in a moment, you'll hear about the specific industries where the economists recommend we focus our efforts. I do want to stress, though, that all businesses are important to our economy, not just those targeted industry clusters that you'll hear about today. In fact, that diversity of our economy is one of our biggest strengths. We need to continue to provide a wide range of job opportunities for people with a variety of interests and skill levels, so more people can live and work here in Frederick County. Now, county government can encourage economic development, and we certainly support it with workforce services and workforce training through education. And Helen mentioned the Monroe Center, which I think is a great collaboration with a community college. And we also have a good collaboration with Hood College and Crest at Root. But the county government can only do so much. 84% of the jobs in Frederick County are in the private sector. And it will take the entire community, including all of you, our business partners, to make sure that we move the GO strategy forward. So together, we can create a vision and a plan to ensure that Frederick County is the place to do business in Maryland.
So now we move to our economists. So Frederick County put out an RFP to solicit interested partners and advertise this opportunity. And we took those that applied, reviewed them, and the top, I think, 4 we brought in for interviews. And the group that you're getting ready to meet, when they came in for their interview, they actually, at the end of the interview, could have done a drop the mic kind of moment with us. And Richard Clinch left the room, and everything in me wanted to run down the hallway, chase after him, and say, "Can you start this tomorrow?" Because I was just so excited about what this group brought. So I am so pleased to introduce these two and say that Frederick County's been so fortunate to be able to work with them. So Dr. Richard Clinch is the director of the Jacob France Institute and has 25-year track record of working on both traditional and technology-led economic development at the local, regional, state, and national level. In 2013, Dr. Clinch served as a senior research economist at the Battelle Technology Partnership Practice, one of the nation's leading providers of consulting services in technology-based economic development, including incubator, research park, and innovation district demands analysis. In 2015, Dr. Clinch became the director of the Jacob France Institute at the University of Baltimore. And if that's not enough, Mitch Horowitz has a strong record of accomplishments in technology-based economic development, where he has worked as a principal economic development consultant, a high-ranking state development official, and as an executive in a fast-growing clinical trial informatics company and mezzanine finance group. Mitch served as the vice president and managing director of the Technology Partnership Practice at Battelle. He now is the principal and managing director of Techonomy Partners, LLC, which transitioned the full capabilities of Battelle into the new independent organization. Mitch holds a master's in public policy from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University and a BS from Cornell University. Mitch and Richard could both speak passionately about Frederick County and our economic vitality moving us into the future for several hours. But we're going to ask them to speak for about 25 to 30 minutes so that you all have time to ask questions before we leave today. And no matter what, we will be out of here by 9:30. So while they speak, please think of the questions you have. And please give a warm Frederick welcome to Dr. Richard Clinch and Mitch Horowitz.
I think this is honestly the first time that anybody said I had the drop the mic moment in a 25, 30-year economics practice. So today I'm here to present the results of our economic development research and strategy for the county. And I talked to Helen, and it's on the website. So as she said, we have about 25 minutes to do what we could easily spend over an hour doing. So I'm going to be very fast. So, and then hold the questions till later. So I'm going to begin really by talking about what our focus is on doing an economic development strategy for a jurisdiction. We feel that economic development really needs to be asset-based. It has to build on the assets that you have within the jurisdiction, within the county here. And the good news is Frederick has lots of assets to build on. But it also has to be targeted and really focus on the core industries that present the best opportunities for economic development, growth, and high-wage job creation. So what we did for this project was a three-part analysis. Task one is we set the economic context. So that was the review of what are the assets here in the county that you can build on, what are the challenges you need to adapt to. Task two was we identified what we think are the best target industry clusters that will drive economic development growth, employment growth here in the county. And then finally, we developed a strategy to capitalize on your assets and target on these particular sectors. So I'm going to talk about the first two tasks because I'm the boring economist, and then Mitch is going to talk about the exciting stuff about what you guys need to do to capitalize on these assets in these targeted industry areas. So again, I'd love to talk for about an hour on your economy, but I'm not allowed to. So what this is in the reports on the web, and all this is in the report. So I'm going to focus kind of on the areas we looked at in terms of the asset identification in the county, and I'm going to hit the highlights. So when you talk about the overall assets in the county, you have a strong economy. So your overall economic performance has been quite strong. You've had strong employment growth. You've led the state and region in many cases for this. You have a diverse industry base. Both Mitch and I were very surprised when we saw how diverse your economy is from all spectrums, from high tech to hospitality. You have it all here in the county. What we found is that local benefits are gaining from this job growth. This strong job growth that is happening in the county has benefited local residents. And you have a competitive workforce. When you look at demographic changes, it's all positive. You know, look around the county, you see lots of construction activity. You see downtown Frederick becoming a thriving, urban area. You see 13 other municipalities doing quite well. You have a growing population. You're attracting millennials. You're attracting highly educated workers. So again, in terms of the population growth, you're doing quite well and attracting the workforce that's needed for the economic development community. And then finally, I think your quality of life is really almost second to none in many ways. You have an affordable cost of living, strong quality of life assets, universities, restaurants, one of the best restaurants in Maryland, some of the best breweries in Maryland, some of the best wineries in Maryland, according to Helen, the best, I guess. So really you have a lot to build on here. You do have some challenges. You're having slower wage growth than the rest of the country and nation. You've had a slow recovery in some of your core industries. On the demographic side, you're facing an aging population. And that's not unique here to this county. That's facing the nation. That's facing almost every jurisdiction in Maryland. In fact, you're doing quite well because your downtown vibrancy in Frederick and county vibrancy, you are attracting younger workers. You're facing workforce shortages in many key occupations and in many key industries. And while you do have a great quality of life, there are some challenges in the areas of affordable housing, congestion, mass transit access, incentives. These are the types of things. So by and large, the picture is wonderful. You do have to face some of these challenges. So that's kind of the summary of what the assets you have to build on are. So the next task was to identify where you should focus your economic development efforts, how do you capitalize on these assets, and where should you focus it. And as the county executive said, this doesn't mean that all industries aren't important, that these industries that we've identified are the best. These are the ones that we consider the best opportunities for growth, but clearly supporting all business is the role of any county economic development office. So in terms of our targeted industry analysis, I'm going to begin by saying, why is a cluster important? So what you want to do is focus your efforts on a cluster. Now, what is a cluster? It's a group of related industries. So it has a shared supply chain, shared workforce, shared knowledge and innovation spillovers, could be shared resources, and by having these related groups work together for a common customer, in many cases like a place like Fort Detrick or the federal government, or different types of customers, you create a synergy that is better than, that supports growth. So this is important because these are the areas that you have the best opportunities to support economic development here in the county. So what we did to measure your clusters is we looked at their overall level of specialization. I won't bore you with how you do it. There's about 2 pages in the report about how we measure specialization. We looked at job generation, and then we looked at the comparative rate of job generation compared to the nation. So this is how we went about systematically identifying your clusters. So what did we find? We focused that there are 6 core clusters, and again, these aren't, doesn't mean you should de-emphasize other industries, but these are the best opportunities for growth here in the county. They represent about 20% of jobs in the county and have been about 25% of job growth over the last 2 business cycles. So these are ones that are driving the county's economy. They're biosciences, which you're specialized and growing. It's computing and IT, which is an emerging area of strength. Hospitality and tourism, which looking at downtown Frederick, looking at the ag tourism and all that stuff, you have it all here in the county. Professional services, which is largely your government contractor base. Transportation, distribution, and logistics. Value-added agriculture. So these are the core clusters that we think you should focus on in your economic development strategy. This is really a presentation of how these clusters have performed. So when you look at the bubble, each of that is the size of the cluster in terms of the jobs and employment. When you look at the vertical axis, it's the level of specialization. So are you above the national average in specialization? And that typically means you have what's called an economic comparative advantage in that industry. So the higher you are up here, the better the industry is. And then the horizontal axis is the performance. So how is the sector performing over the last 2 business cycles? So if you go out here, that means you're adding more jobs. So again, biosciences and professional engineering services and computer and IT all stand out. Those 2 are specialized and growing rapidly. Value-added ag is growing very strongly. And again, hospitality and tourism, you haven't had the strong job growth, you're specialized, but they're doing quite well in our targets for growth. So that's what this chart means. So I'm now going to go briefly into each of the clusters and describe them and kind of why we think they're important. So biosciences is one of the core driver economies or businesses of the Frederick County economy. It has 53 establishments and about 2,000 jobs. It's a high-wage sector. It's had strong job growth over the last 2 business cycles. It's driven by pharmaceutical manufacturing, AstraZeneca, and research many times related to Fort Detrick. It's strong, specialized, and rapidly growing. So that's one of the core industries. Computing and IT. About 300 establishments, about 2,000 jobs. I'm rounding all this. Very high wages, so again, doing very well in the county. It's had strong long-term growth, but has experienced some challenges in the recent period. But what's interesting here in the county is you have a strong base of entrepreneurial activity growing this sector. Hospitality and tourism, really an emerging sector here in the county. You have about 80 establishments, about 1,200 jobs. It's a lower wage sector, but it's had strong post-recession growth. You're not yet specialized in growing, so it's an area for future growth opportunities here in the county. And what's interesting here is it's really integrally linked to your value-added agricultural economy. Your professional engineering, this is in many cases your federal contractor base, about 300 establishments, about 4,000 jobs, your high wages at 85,000. It's had strong long-term growth, but recently was impacted by the loss of a major employer. But if you adjust for that loss, the sector without that is continuing to grow. So you've faced the challenge, you've adapted to the challenge, and you've returned to growth. Government contracting, and mainly in the areas of research and engineering, play a really core part in this sector. Transportation, logistics, and distribution. This is a sector that is booming nationally. I've done a lot of work nationally on fulfillment centers, warehouses, and distribution. You're very well positioned for this. The sector is doing well in the county. About 400 establishments, 4,000 jobs. It's the largest of the clusters. It's a middle wage sector. It's had both long-term and short-term growth. You're not specialized in this, but it's an area of growth and opportunity for you to become specialized. One area that is a challenge for this is, do you have the available land? And as you all know, driving around Frederick can be quite difficult, so is the congestion going to be a barrier to the development of this sector? And then value-added agriculture, I think this is one of the most exciting sectors here in the county. As a foodie, you have some of the best wineries, some of the best breweries, and this is really the link between Old Frederick and New Frederick, because what it is you're going past your agricultural history and processing this into products that are shipped around the country, around the world. So you have about 90 establishments. It's important to note this does not include farms. It's establishments that are places that have covered UI employment, and about 1,300 jobs. It's a middle wage sector, It's had strong long-term and near-term growth. You're specialized in a variety of areas ranging from breweries to livestock to dairy. And it's, again, strong growth linked to preserving your county's historical agricultural emphasis. Now, when we did this, Helen said, well, what about manufacturing? So what we really need to, Frederick County has historically done quite well in manufacturing. You've been in the manufacturing sector, so she really wanted us to make sure we emphasize it. And I do want to say that manufacturing is core to both the value-added ag and biosciences space, but this is an area that the county needs to continue to pay attention to, but might not present the greatest opportunities for growth because the region, the state and the region are not specialized in this. So it's not like Maryland is attracting huge manufacturers that can be interested in Frederick, but that doesn't mean you don't have opportunities to grow here. So the manufacturing sector has about 200 establishments, about 5,000 jobs. It is the key driver of both biosciences and value-added ag in the county. As I said, the county is not yet specialized, the state's not specialized, but it does have opportunities for value-added growth. And the key sectors are pharmaceuticals, construction equipment, manufacturing materials and products, printing, machinery and equipment, and food processing, which is in the pharmaceuticals is obviously a core part of biosciences, and food processing is probably obviously the core part of the value-added ag sector. So those are the core clusters. So again, what we want to emphasize here is that this does not mean you should ignore other businesses or other sectors. So two other areas came out as an emerging or retention targets. This is the construction sector. Frederick County is specialized in construction. It's a huge industry here. You have construction companies that are active throughout the region, from DC to north to west to east. But the county has only a limited opportunity to grow this sector because it's really dependent on how the regional construction markets do. There's not much they can do other than make the county, which they are doing, an attractive place to do business and be responsive to them. So again, they should focus on it, emphasize it, help retain and grow it, but it maybe shouldn't be the core sector to identify for growth like the first 6 we've identified. And then finance and insurance. That's a sector that the county is specialized in, has a large number of jobs. The county has large back office operations for major national finance and insurance companies. However, the county has been losing jobs in this, and this has been a sector that has been impacted by the changing patterns of development in the state, region, and county. So again, they should do everything they can to preserve and protect and support this industry. However, it doesn't create a clear opportunity for strong growth. And the last thing I want to emphasize is, as the county executive talked about, is what is great about this economic development strategy, in my mind, is that it doesn't just focus on these high-tech sectors. It focuses on a broad base of industries representative of the diversity of this county's economy that will create jobs really across the spectrum. So when you look at and you divide the county's workforce into groups by wages, one of the 6 clusters hits every one of them. So it's appropriate for the diversity of the county's economy and appropriate for the diversity of the county's population. So I'm going to pass the presentation over to Mitch for the interesting part of what do you do with all this information.
Good morning. Thank you for breakfast. It was wonderful. And I think what Richard's really laying out for us is that we're really talking about how do we sustain a broad momentum that's taking place in this county. And those clusters that Richard put up there, they're really important because they also bring new income into the county. Your hospitality sector and tourism is bringing in folks like Richard and I who live right outside the county coming in here and spending our money here. Same thing on the value-added agriculture and the biosciences, obviously, and IT. And so when you think about these things, without these kinds of drivers, we don't have a successful economy in terms of growing income and really enabling even the broader set of businesses and retail operations to really thrive here. So that's a really important element to kind of understand about these industry clusters. And the focus around sustainability, I think, we did not know the data about Frederick coming in. I think, people in Maryland sometimes, overlook areas and they think all the growth is happening right in the Inner Beltway, right in Montgomery County or in Howard County, but it's actually happening here. And And it's happening here in a way that's really important, and I think Richard kind of hit some of the key points about it. It's not only that the job growth is fast, but you've been rebounding. You had, a major loss of an employer, but you did not lose your momentum and growth. And you came back very strong from the recession. And this diversity of base is just not something you see across Maryland. And so with that base, the question becomes, how do we think about the future and sustaining it, and then also addressing some of the challenges that Richard looked at? And I think for us, one of the key kind of goals looking to the future is how do we keep building on a lot of the momentum to address growing our wage base so that we can keep and attract to jobs here in Frederick more of the residents that live here in Frederick, and also at the same time begin to recognize that it's not just about where the growth is coming, but you actually have the ability now, because you have enough of a base, to do it on your own, to basically look at Frederick as a driver rather than simply as kind of the bedroom community that's getting the back office operations. How do we actually put you more into the front and move that forward? And so our overall strategic direction for you, and this is something that has been now pretty widely shared and I know will be an important discussion here, is how do we sustain this diversity in the industry base while raising the performance, particularly around those more innovation, high-wage sectors that Richard showed you, so that we can actually raise the overall economic growth, the high-quality growth here, and keep moving this county forward in a way that really fosters an environment that stands out while recognizing and continuing to fuel the growth of all these other industries that provide a much broader base of jobs for county residents, and increasingly a very important regional driver for lots of parts of Maryland. So with that, what we identified was, first, we're not starting from scratch. This county has been really hard at work at building an economic development program that does all the right things, and that means it has all three legs of the stool. The first leg is, what are we doing to expand and retain our existing businesses? That's really important. Second thing is, how do we have more homegrown companies? And, things like the expansion of FTSE to downtown, those are the kinds of things that really stand out in making sure that you continue to have homegrown development, because without that, entrepreneurial growth, sometimes you can get very stagnant in your economy. And then the third thing is you have to have a pretty strong outreach marketing so that others know about you and are making investments in your community as well. And those things are happening already. And what we're proposing is not so much a change in direction, but actually kind of deepening your engagement with that in a way that really can lead you forward in the next 10 years. And what we identified was kind of four key strategic priorities. One is workforce, and without talent in today's economy, that is very difficult to bring businesses here, to have them think about your existing businesses to expand here. New companies, if they're going to grow, can they actually get the workers that they need? And when somebody's looking at your economy from outside, is it here? And because you have a diverse base, it actually presents an interesting challenge of how do you do it? And we'll talk about that. The infrastructure, the placemaking that Richard was describing, that doesn't just happen by accident. That has to be planned. That is a collaboration, not only of the county, but its municipalities. And there's some interesting opportunities to advance that and to think about it relative not only to your industry clusters, but to things that support a wide variety of your diverse industry base. Ultimately, economic development's a contact sport. You can't simply say we're gonna just do a few tweaky things here. You got to get into the ground. You got to be working with your employers. And so while we're promoting a much more focused effort around the technology and biosciences, we also see lots of opportunities to also continue to work with the rest of the industry base on specific projects that come out from your engagement with the employers, to really make sure that they stay competitive and that they can continue to look at Frederick as a real high-growth location for them. And then, and I think both Richard and I are able to say this because we've both lived in Maryland now for a combined, oh my goodness, 80 years. I mean, he keeps hair on. I have lost my hair. I don't understand what happened. When we started, we both had hair on our heads, but something went wrong in my genes. We know that your story isn't what's happening on the ground here. We know that is not how the rest of Maryland, the rest of the region, the rest of the nation knows you as well. And so that's a great opportunity today as you continue to build on your strengths to then also be able to project and brand yourself, because really nobody knows what your economy is about. I think you've done a great job on the tourism side, so we know it can be done. The question now is, how do we do it on the economic development side? So we're going to walk through these things. I have to commend Richard because he actually went through quick enough, and I don't know if you know how hard it is to go through that kind of data and not get lost in it, that I think we have a good amount of time to kind of go through these strategies. So the thing about workforce, this is a common issue that just is cross-cutting in each of the industry clusters, and we heard it very clearly in our outreach and interviews. But each of the industry clusters have their own specific, unique needs, and they have different kinds of skill mixes and stuff. And so, how do you go about this? It's very difficult to say we're going to have staff to work with each cluster one by one, and so we have a different view of how to do it. What we want to be able to see is a system where there's support for your industry clusters, but it's kind of more of a functional support. And so the first thing that we're recommending, and there've been some really interesting advances here, some great programs. I mean, Frederick County Workforce Services, Frederick Community College, Hood, Mount St. Mary's, what they've been doing, the creation of CREST and what it might be able to do fully into the future. And of course, the efforts of Tech Frederick to actually make some programs come alive. But what we learn is if you have too much volunteer efforts, it doesn't work. You got to support the volunteer efforts. You got to give them some ability and capacity. And so first thing we want to do is do that kind of staffing capacity that can facilitate meetings across the clusters, and work with each of the clusters, can collect the right kind of data, and can help them leverage the state and resources that are there. Second thing is sometimes you just have to take this stuff and be bold about it. And we think there's an opportunity to create a work where you live effort. And it's kind of happening already, because in the tech sector you have these meetup groups. Now thousands of folks are participating in this. It's peer-to-peer networking, and what we need to do is think about that as a way to get people to think about the opportunities that Frederick has working closely with the employers. Can we do that more broadly across a wider range of skill mixes? And also perhaps help some of our larger employers who have to compete in a national marketplace for top scientific and management talent to be able to say for their trailing spouses, here's places that they can come work as well. So we could see that very important kind of talent bank. And then as we talk to the employers, what we're learning is that while the local colleges are doing a great job of connecting with the employers, they don't always have enough graduates to meet all the employment needs. And so, and your own sons and daughters, they're going to College Park, they're going to UMBC, they're going to Frostburg. They may also be going to Virginia Tech and Penn State, And so we need to be able to project, because this is the places where your employer community is hiring from, a much stronger presence about Frederick itself. And there's some excellent examples. Birmingham, Alabama, which has been one of those kind of high growth, very creative localities, stands out in one of their initiatives through their business alliance, where they're actually going to campuses, organized with a group of employers to really recruit top talent students. They bring them back to Birmingham, give them a great experience in terms of understanding opportunities to work in Frederick and host them. And then they have an onboarding campaign as people come and move into the community to really feel part of it, because we could tell this is a very cohesive community with a lot of really cool stuff happening, but sometimes you move into a place you don't know how to connect, right? So that's a really important element. We also have a number of recommendations on the placemaking and infrastructure, and these are things dealing with the affordable housing questions and the limited in-county mass transit opportunities, the congestion on the interstates. I do have to say, when you do a reverse commute, it's not so bad. So I was coming up from Montgomery County, and I just flew right into Frederick. It was great. And then there's an issue that you're going to hear a lot about, which is, as your innovation-led sectors grow, whether it's biosciences and their need for wet lab space, whether it's IT sector and their need for kind of smart buildings that also have a kind of a hipness to them and connection to your downtown locations, not only in city of Frederick, but also in your municipalities, we need to have quality buildings. And so I worry about, as FTSE has success downtown, where are their graduates going to go? And so we need a whole range of actions that we've listed here that really get at this stuff. Now, the county doesn't always control everything about the placemaking and the zoning, but I think continuing to work together with all the municipalities and really having a better sense of where the planning has to go, that's a very important element. The placemaking that's happening here in the city of Frederick is excellent, but we got to get that conference and hotel center going. We need to be thinking about these connector transit options to ensure that some of the office parks around Frederick can also be part of this excitement and offer that value proposition to their tenants. There's a whole bunch of options about, can we work with our employers to incentivize their workers to live closer to downtown, and there's an opportunity to work with, as your companies are expanding in these tech fields, that they have the ability to do the tenant improvements so that we can work with your developers in an effective way that we know is related to job growth, and we call for a tenant improvement fund. On the actions about the clusters themselves, we see specific opportunities in both the biosciences and the tech, and then I think a very opportunistic approach around the other clusters. And so for the biosciences, this is a sector, and just to give a little bit more about my background, I put in place the original biosciences strategy in Maryland back in the 1990s, and then I was the technology advisor for the state. And our group, both at Patel and on, this is an area that we have depth and excellence in, and so we work around the country. Just finished working up in Washington State, around Seattle, and been working in Houston and Arizona and so forth. Here, sometimes people think you have to grow everything yourself. Well, you have an anchor institution that is world-class that sits here at Fort Detrick in terms of the Frederick National Lab. It's a FFRDC, which a federally funded R&D center, so it has a very clear mission of working with its employer, with its client, which is, National Cancer Center and the National Infectious Disease, Allergy and Infectious Disease. But it has in it not only great minds who are doing some of the cutting edge research, but it has facilities that are world class. We need to help people see that better, and that's the role of a county economic development agency. And so there are ways to better target emerging companies that could work with the PIs. So, you can't just go in and use those facilities, right? You have to have a reason to be in those buildings, and that has to be furthering the mission of that anchor institution. But there may be ways to do that. The other thing is that we got to make sure there's enough wet lab space. So right now, Maryland has a shortage of wet lab space statewide, very much a part of Montgomery County, and of course, having been a resident of Montgomery County, we of course closed our biotech incubator just as that was happening. But that's an opportunity. So there's no way you're going to be able to really get growing biotech companies that are in targeted areas related, let's say, to your anchor institutions here, if you don't have the facilities. The same thing is true about your tech sector, and Tech Frederick is just, reminds me of the Montgomery County High Tech Council that was so successful back in the 80s and 90s. I think you have all those elements of a culture coming together, but they are unique. And they are businesses that are truly building quality companies that get to profitability and serve needs of customers, not just federal government, well beyond, and building products. That means that they sometimes don't need the same kind of capital that venture capital offers, right? I mean, it's not that's always the sexy stuff. It's sometimes capital to help them expand. And that might be something to look into and talk with them about. But getting the right kinds of buildings in place and making sure that there's the ability to keep growing in Frederick is very, very important, and those workforce issues. And then ultimately, I think by doing the workforce, by doing the infrastructure and the placemaking, all the other clusters will rise because, in fact, that's what we learned was a big part of their needs. But in addition to that, there are still going to be some interesting needs that have come up, and we identified one about some of the zoning around connecting your value-added agriculture better with hospitality and tourism. So there are going to be things, and when you read our report, one thing that folks made us do at the county was explain and share with you some of the insights we got. Obviously, you got a great team here to implement. Though I think both Richard and I would love to be of help if we can, but I think that when you go back through the draft, you'll see a lot of depth in the writing about these ideas. These are not just bullet points being posed. And then the last is really around the branding and stuff. And so, as Richard said, and I do agree with him, I've never had a drop the mic moment in my life. You need some good branding people because we are economists, right? And so we think in numbers and we think in long sentences and and in concepts, and I could never come up with a bumper sticker. And I say this, and my daughter's an artist, and I don't know where she came from, but it's. So we know you're going to need that. Hopefully our report, having worked with branding consultants and marketing people before, you need the substance. It can't only be sizzle. This is not a county that's just about sizzle and image. This is a county of substance. And you're on a path for really strong sustainability. When Richard showed you that bubble chart, what he didn't emphasize was, yes, there are stars in your world, right, which are both specialized and growing, but you actually have a lot of emerging sectors that have been having strong growth but are not yet at that level of high specialization. And so there's still work to be done to grow those things, and that's really important. But if you don't tell the world about yourself, then you've missed it. And so we think that branding is important, but we also feel like there are some targeted audiences regionally, and working with your business community as ambassadors, getting them with a mission to say, hey, when you show up at a meeting at Maryland's Technology Council, or if there's some more a Society of Information Management or whatever it is, we want you to go there with an intention to tell people, if you're thinking about starting a business, sell your house in Bethesda or in Fairfax. Come move here in Frederick. You'll save and have it's just a quality of house and good lifestyle. Probably have $200,000 to $300,000 in your pocket to go start a business and build your business here. It's getting your message out about what makes this county special. So there's, again, a lot of good ideas here. I know that you may have some other ideas, and I know that this county, the Economic Development Department is all ears for these things, and so with that, I'll bring Richard up. We're actually on time, Richard. I don't, we don't usually do it like, we usually run over. All right. So we'll take your questions. Thank you. And one last thing that I'll just leave up here is, within the strategy, there's lots of, because it is very data-oriented, there are real goals. And you'll see the goals there, and there are just way too many to kind of walk through. But you can't do a good strategy without being able to measure things. So I'll leave it up behind us because it gives you the strategies and it gives you ways to think about how do you actually know you're making progress.
So before we ask questions, I want to do just a couple thank yous. So first, thank you, County Executive Gardner, for allowing us to do this report. We really, as Mitch said, we can't brand, we can't sizzle without substance, and this is truly the substance we need. So thank you for that. Thank you, you two. And way back in the back, Heather Graham, all the interviews that these gentlemen did, the drafts of the report, just pulling everything together. She started, and I think the first day she started, I walked in and gave her this project, and she smiled. So thank you, Heather Graham, for this. So real quick, we're videotaping this, so if you have a question, we need you to speak into a microphone. And if you have a question, ask the question. We want questions, not like big statements about Frederick County. As you can see, these two are brilliant. We only have them for another 20 minutes, so ask your questions now so that we can get those good ideas going. And Jody, I'm going to hand this microphone over to you. So if you have a question, raise your hand. Somebody's got to have a question.
Okay, good.
Hi there. Is this on? Okay. Is there a contingency plan that you might discuss about what happens if the the Amazon H2 ends up in DC or Montgomery County? How might that impact Frederick, and how could we break glass in case of emergency to take advantage of it?
Yeah, I've worked on the city's Amazon bid, so I think that Washington's got a strong probability of success, 3 of the 20 locations. And I think Frederick County is well positioned in terms of it would really benefit mostly from the jobs created either in Montgomery, Virginia, or DC. So I think the question of transit linkages outside of the county is critical here. And providing the development opportunities for the type of residential growth that will come, bringing 50,000 jobs into this region, which again I think is a reasonable probability of success. And I think you're doing both of those things. I mean, I think the placemaking and the transit are going to be vital for growth, not just for Amazon, but this region's going to grow with or without Amazon. And you're going to benefit from that growth to the extent you have the development space and linkages to where the job growth is occurring, in addition to the job growth that's happening here in the county.
Yeah. And I would just add, there are at least 2 sectors that, if you were intentional about it, could really benefit. So you may get new residents, right? You may get new people because you offer that high quality community. But I think there's a way to even break the mold a little bit, because knowing a lot about your IT companies, boy, you have a company like Amazon who is so about the new web applications of the future, the kinds of businesses you can build. That's what your businesses are about in that IT sector. And so I see this as a great way to say, hey, you're close enough, and yet you have a great business environment to grow. And with Fitzy downtown now, plus all of the efforts that go on at Tech Frederick and the community they create, I think that's a tremendous opportunity. But then also, that whole distribution and transportation and logistics, it may turn out that component of what Amazon thinks about having more excellence around, they may kind of begin to think about this location as a place to bring some of their latest and best technologies and test it out and so forth. So being a demonstration site, there's just a lot of opportunities. Don't just think if it goes to Montgomery County at Wifeway, which is actually right near my house, and I don't know whether I like it or don't like it. This is what the way Montgomery County people think about development, right? Maybe, I don't know. But I do think that if it's just as likely to go to Northern Virginia because they have a great site as well. And so even if it happens there, I still think you have the ability to leverage it and to offer a value proposition to your growing sectors here about what does it mean to be close to Amazon. Yes, it's very exciting.
In your notes on computing and IT, you said that we had weaker trends in the post-recession along with state and region as nations soared. So I wanted to see if I could get you to drill into that and maybe provide a little bit of extra insight as to what's going on in the area here. Maybe that understanding would be helpful for us.
Sure. I mean, this is a number that puzzled Richard and I, because we've talked to your businesses and we have a really good sense of the companies and how solid they are. And so we did try to drill down as much as we could. There's a little mystery to some of the numbers because the actual industry employment numbers, there's a thing that the federal government calls non-disclosure. They don't like you be able to figure out an employment number to a company. So there's some limits to what we could do, but there's other databases that we looked at. So we did see that there might have been one company or two companies that were kind of government services that got kind of reclassified given the nature of the work, and that could have contributed to it a little bit. But it was really hard to tell for sure. I actually rationalized it in that the companies are not as much about growing their employment bases right now as really making sure they're really strong, profitable companies. And that's given the nature of this business. So like if you serve the federal government, you're just a body shop, and I've lived in a federal government contractor, and we went from 30 people to 250 people based on one contract. Is that really growing employment for the future? Do we have a long-term profitability and all that kind of stuff? Every 3, 4, 5 years, we were up for grabs. So I think that if we could help the businesses, the businesses here bootstrap a lot. So if we could give them the ability to have a financing source that's built off of cash flows, not taking equity out of the business, that might enable a lot of these really excellent entrepreneurs that are leading these companies to be able to say, that's a reasonable proposition. I can maybe move things a little faster, and that would get us growth here. But I do think that having FTSE downtown and having that focus now around growing tech companies, along with the broader view that they had that tech companies were part of, but it was a lot of life sciences as well. I think that will really move things forward here in a positive way as well. But we were surprised with that number as well. So if you have another reason, we'd love to hear it. But we kicked the tires that number really hard, and it's real. I mean, unfortunately, we couldn't say it. So I think the long-term trends are more appropriate. But don't just take this for granted that we're going to have the kind of employment growth.
With the acknowledgement that this is a bit self-serving for my organization, but we do economic development for downtown Frederick. And so since there's two experts in the room, I would feel silly if I didn't take the chance to say, do you have any specific recommendations for downtown in particular? I realize this is a countywide look, which I greatly appreciate, but my little piece of the puzzle is downtown Frederick.
Well, I think as Mitch talked about, placemaking is a vital part of this strategy. And as you move things like FTSE downtown, you have to make sure you have the type of quality real estate that the graduates are going to capitalize on. And one of the innovative suggestions I think we made in the report was to create linkages between the suburban office parks and downtown Frederick through some type of, we don't know if this is feasible, but through some type of a free commuter service, because what that would do is there's a changing real estate dynamic now, that there's a movement away from your traditional suburban office parks into the more downtown areas. But for many of the security-related work that's done by some of your companies, the suburban parks are more appropriate for what they do. So the question is, how do you create linkages between that and the downtown area? And that could also address some of the issues of transit linkages within the county. So making space available, which you're doing. I mean, there's plenty of construction activity when you drive around the city. Creating better linkages to the suburban space and space for those as they grow to hopefully grow downtown for some of the stuff that can be located downtown. Do you have any?
No, you did it very well.
Thanks for coming to Frederick. Do you foresee, or how do you foresee the medical cannabis industry as a part of Frederick County's growing economy?
Not a non-controversial question.
I just know that Richard's kid lived in Colorado, and my kids live in LA, so,
Clearly, if with the agricultural base you have here, the agricultural expertise you have resident in the county, there is opportunities for this industry here depending on how the distribution system would be set up. We're far from expert in this, but clearly you're positioned for it. You have space and experience in this. And in terms of if it has to be inside grow, you also have cheaper real estate than, with that experience. So we did not study this, but that would be a quick off-the-cuff response. Any other questions? We did our job that well.
You said a strength was strong roads for Frederick County, and an emerging opportunity was transportation. If you drive through Frederick, it's a lot of congestion. What do you think are the opportunities if we actually get additional lanes through Frederick, up through Frederick both ways? What benefits do you think will happen for Frederick? And what if we don't get them? Will we hit a transportation issue where no one will come because they can't get through there? Can't get through.
That's a bigger study than we did, so again, it would be a quick off-the-cuff response to a very hard question. So in terms of the transportation, distribution, logistics, I think it's really, you have rail, you have roads, you have reasonably cost real estate within the regional context. So to the extent you can develop better road linkages regionally, west, north, east, south, that is a great growth industry. When you look at transportation, logistics, distribution, these fulfillment centers are growing throughout the region, and you're close enough to be really benefiting from that with the lower cost, and you also have access to workers from Western Maryland and north that are lower cost workers as well. So you're very well positioned for this if you have it. The other thing would be really both internal and external transit linkages. When we met with the planning department, they said you can't build the roads out of the problem. You build more roads, you get more people. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that. However, there are innovative things that you can do in terms of better transit linkages within the county and linkages to the south that would have to be done in a regional context for linkages south that would really address the issue. So I think there is a point where you grow, you're a victim of your own success, and you're there now. But clearly, some investment is needed to address this.
Yeah. And the other thing everybody has this impression that everybody in Frederick commutes out of the residents commute for jobs. In fact, actually, we didn't find the rates where it was actually with kind of better than the overall region, and it was, I think, surprising to us. I think the sustainability of this county and the ability to keep those emerging industries and as well as your existing current strengths on a good growth plane means that more and more people who live in Frederick will work in Frederick. And to the extent that you do go beyond, you may actually, and in some of these industries, you may actually be bringing people from other parts of, particularly as a gateway to Western Maryland, coming to work here in Frederick. So I do think that thinking about your own internal growth and then thinking about how do you deal with your own internal congestion is as important. I did drive up this morning. And Richard probably came through the back way from Howard. I actually drove up 270. I mean, I can tell how bad that traffic is. And I don't know that there was a particularly bad day today. So I do think that people, if they knew they had the ability to grow jobs here and businesses, they might take advantage of that. Now, a lot of times as a business you can't do it, but I think that's the way to really ensure how do you deal with these highway, particularly the interstate congestion. It's just grow more jobs in Frederick and have your local people continue to work here in even greater numbers. You got to ask questions, or you're going to have to go back for a second on breakfast. So,
One of the recommendations, actually action number 2, advance a work where you live project, identified as longer term and significant in cost implications. I specifically wanted to drill in and ask why. Why did you perceive that would be a significant cost? and what strategies would could you elaborate some of the significant or special things that you would suggest?
Right. Yeah. So what does it mean to be significant? I mean, so this requires, it's longer term because you got to build it up, and you got to have, you can't just snap your finger and get this moving in the right direction. Particularly if you're going to have not just a talent bank, but be a trusted kind of intermediary to connect workers, professionals with employers. But to really do it well, it requires resources if you do it on the cheap, you're just not going to get there. And so, kind of what's a significant level? We're talking about, you might have to make and we're talking about from the county economic development budget, it could be a $500,000 a year initiative to really do it well, because you're having to vet, you're having to really give a very concierge kind of service to the talent, and then you also have to be connected to the employer community, really understand what their needs are. So these things have been tried from time to time in different communities. It's hard to build it and sustain it. And every time I go back and I've had best practices, I find out those things came and went. And so, we don't want to tell you it's easy to do or that you could just do it on the cheap. So I think, it may need a significant impetus. Now, if you can build a business model around it so that the employers see a real value, well, then they may actually be willing to support it in ways that, can allow it to be a really good public-private partnership. But in the beginning, I think it has to be done with quality, and you can't just think you could do it, in 6 months, and that means staff resources, and that may mean some additional kinds of website development, database development, and figuring out just how to make these services work well. So that's why it got that notion.
My firm is in that tech sector, so many of the employees we're trying to recruit would love to bike or walk to work, and there's only so much real estate downtown, of course, and of limited affordability to some of the entry-level ones. However, with appropriate linkages out to the suburban areas, they would ride their bikes in, and some of them are doing so in spite of some of the challenges. So was that considered when you looked at these linkages, alternate forms of transportation besides just a free commuter line or commuter bus kind of thing?
Well, we did not identify bike lanes as a specific issue, but we said identify the issue of placemaking. And as we all know, placemaking consists of everything from sustainability to biking to affordable housing. So we did not mention bike lanes, but I think there's plenty of innovative things going on. Like if you look at Howard County, where I live now, they're working on a 15-year bike plan to link everything together, and habitually underfund it. But the issue of placemaking is important. Alternative means of transportation is vital to placemaking. We did not specifically identify the issue of bikes, but it would clearly be part of it. And the county is well positioned for this, because I don't think you do have, in terms of linkages to some of the rural roads, you could put bike lanes in, and in the city, it's a lot easier than, say, Baltimore, which has put a huge number of bike lanes in. It's a lot easier out in the city in terms of scale. So no, we didn't identify specifically, but yes, as part of a broader placemaking strategy. And as a biker, I agree. So.
Well, I'm sure you'll read the report and you'll have lots of questions, and Helen will answer all of them.
So, thank you. So I'm having a moment. When you read your favorite book and you're on the last chapter and you read really slow because you don't want it to end? That's kind of the moment that economic development is having with Richard and Mitch, because it really has been a phenomenal process with them. But now it's time to put down the book and actually get to work. And I think that we've been put in a place where clearly you understand where Frederick is. And so we hope that you all, as ambassadors, go out and share the good news in the nation of how great Frederick County is. And a couple things. We are currently hiring 2 positions. Both fit really, really well with this report, and we planned it that way. So both are business development specialists on Heather Graham's team. One is across the board with all industries attraction. And what that is probably not spending a lot of time in Frederick, spending time out and about telling our story on why you should be doing business and locating your companies in Frederick. And the other position is a business development specialist that we're focusing on knowledge-based industries. So both the biotech and the information technology industries. You know, now that so much healthcare and biotech is blending with powerful technologies, and I use the example of you're going to be able to have all your healthcare files on your watch, or you can have all your healthcare files on your watch. We thought it was important to blend those industries together for a business development specialist. But we are currently a team of 8. When we hire, we'll be a team of 10, and we cannot do all of this by ourselves. So we will be reaching out, obviously, to our economic development partners to talk about branding, placemaking, workforce development, and all the other pieces that will help us round out this report. So with that, stay tuned. There's lots of excitement coming out of our office and out of Root, and we truly appreciate you all coming and always being so supportive to economic development. So thank you so much.